So if you want to do something for gifted children, you don't need resources, you only need yourself. That is a saying by the National Association for Gifted Children in the United Kingdom. The next slide. And that means if people want to change something, they find a way. If people don't want to change anything, they find a reason for not doing anything. The next slide. So I won't give you any recipes. I'll tell you what I did, why I did it, how I did it. And if there are any ideas that suit your circumstances, then take them and make them fit for you and for the children that you teach. The next slide. Independence, I think, is very important. So make all children independent, especially the gifted ones. And don't tell them exactly what and how to do that. Let them find out for themselves what they want to solve the problems. The next slide, internet resources. I will not speak about internet resources because there are too many problems that can happen that you are not connected to the WLAN. And I think I just tell you about things that you can do without the internet. I use the internet every day. I use my computer every day, but sometimes for children, it's too much. It's better to go to an archaeological site or to a museum than in just pressing a few buttons and look at it on the internet. So enrichment and acceleration, next slide, sorry. It's a good program for gifted children, needs enrichment and acceleration. Next slide. Enrichment is more popular than acceleration. Next slide. Enrichment is accepted worldwide by parents, teachers, and even by experts as a good way to educate gifted children because they stay with their classmates, age mates, friends, and are not torn out of their classes. They are not pushed beyond their ability. They don't have to work with older children. It allows them one more year of happy childhood play. And that means that childhood is always happy, which is not really the case. So enrichment does not necessarily need special advocacy because everybody thinks it's a good idea. Next slide. On the other hand, acceleration is accepted worldwide by parents, teachers, and even by experts as a bad way to educate gifted children. They can't stay with their classmates, age mates, and friends and are torn out of their classes, but sometimes they don't have a friend in their class. They are pushed beyond their ability. They have to work with older children, which seems to be a bad thing. A year of happy childhood is stolen from them. Therefore, acceleration does need special advocacy, and that's one of the things I'm going to do in my presentation. Next slide. So why do not only lay persons, such as most parents, but also expert in teaching and even in gifted education, often disagree with acceleration, even try to prevent it? Nicholas Colangelo and his team published 12 reasons why acceleration is not accepted in the USA. To me, number 3 seems to be the most important. So, acceleration runs counter to personal beliefs. When personal beliefs conflict with research evidence, personal beliefs win out almost every time. We saw exactly the same thing happening with Corona. If people are against vaccination, they don't believe in it, well, that was more important than science. Next slide. If you want to have information on acceleration, one of the best addresses I can give you is the Acceleration Institute in Iowa. So if you just put Acceleration Institute Iowa into Google, you can get lots and lots of information. Acceleration is twice as effective as enrichment. John Hattie, an Australian, and somebody from New Zealand did a meta-analysis of both options. And a meta-analysis is that several research results are taken together that can be compared and to find out what the main result is. And this is one of the things he found. Enrichment, he says that when the efficiency is 0.4, then it becomes effective. And you can see that enrichment is just below efficiency. If you want to know how he found this out, you will have to read the book. That's far too complicated to explain here. And one of the reasons is maybe if a child has done all the maths and gets another piece of paper and full of problems, which are not anymore, sorry, I was too fast. Yes, it's okay. Then the child is not getting ahead. It's not efficient. It may be entertaining, but it's not efficient. So the next slide. You can see that acceleration is twice as efficient as enrichment. And that means the children really get ahead if they're accelerated according to their abilities. But here you can also see the number of people involved were more than 30,000 for enrichment and very few for acceleration. And that is always the case because a lot more children can profit from good enrichment, and acceleration is not always necessary. It always depends on the situation that the people are in. Next slide. My research into grade skipping. The first one was, you can see, more than 30 years ago. Lower Saxony is a state in one of the states in Germany, and that's where I was a teacher. And I asked the schools how many pupils had skipped in the previous 10 years. So that is the book. And in 2001, I repeated the study for the schools in Lower Saxony. Grade skipping had been made easier, and the attitude towards giftedness had changed and had become more positive. And I wanted to know what the effect that had had on grade skipping. Schools were asked for figures from 1990 to 2001, and that means there are figures for 20 years for my state. And this is the result that you can see. You see the first years, it was very, very rare, the first 10 years. There's a dip and nobody can explain that, what happened then. And in the mid-90s, 1995, they changed the law and made it easier. And you can see how the figures went up, especially in primary school. The blue ones are primary school. Green are grammar schools. And the red is a school in between 5th and 6th grade. And before that, there was no acceleration or anything happening there, but that's when I included it. Next slide. If a school claims to have experience with acceleration, it should have happened more than twice in 10 years. Anything less is not experience. So in the 1990s, 0.4% of primary schools, 1% of grammar schools, and no comprehensive schools in Lower Saxony had experience, but everybody said it's very dangerous, don't do it. And that never come across a child that had been accelerated. Put it another way, is 99.6% had no experience, 99% of grammar schools, and again, 100% of comprehensive schools. It just did not happen in the 80s. I was teaching at a school with orientation level, grades 5 and 6. Between 1995 and 2004, 6 children skipped a grade. Just as many skipped from primary school into ours, and none of them had any problems, neither intellectually nor socially, because I think my colleagues and I treated them the right way. This does not seem to be much, 6 children in 7 years, but it was actually a lot because 80% of the same type of school in my state had no grade skippers at all, and the others had 2 or maybe 3, and that was a lot for them. The next slide. In 2012, I did another study. I asked adults who had skipped a grade why they were at school. I had got 115 answers. I think it's very important to ask adults because they can see all the years they spent at school, when it was difficult, when it was easy. And if their memory is positive, they will also recommend acceleration for other people or maybe for their own children. And if their memory is negative, they say, well, it's a bad thing, don't do it. And the birth years were between 1917 and 1987. So these figures span 70 years. And here are the results of the adults. I asked them, among other things, would you skip again? And you can see almost 90% of the women and 80% of the men said, yes, if circumstances were the same, I would skip again. I also asked them, would you let your child skip? Well, the men said, a few more men said, not really. And some women said so too. And would you recommend it for others? Then they often wrote, well, we don't know the child, we don't know the circumstances, so we can't really tell. One of the adults who had skipped a grade and answered my questionnaire said that her son, she wanted to prevent her son from having to skip a grade, so she sent him to school early. But she also said he's now in 3rd grade. His teacher says he's ready for skipping. So if the children are really gifted, you can't prevent acceleration, not really. All right, the next slide. This is a bit difficult to explain. In German, we can make very long words like Entscheidungshilfen, and if I translate it, it means something like assistance to make a decision. And it looks something like this. I'll show a bit more that you can read. Here you can't see much. This one is for children in primary school. And here you can see it a bit more. Unfortunately, it's all in German. On the left-hand side, there's things written that you can see how children in primary school behave. So the first one is it's very good in German and knows things that the children in the same class don't know yet. It's same in mathematics. They think quickly, they want to learn more, things like that. And on the right-hand side, you see the sky. The 0 in the middle means we don't know or we can't see it. The child doesn't show it. And then there's positive up to very positive and negative to very negative. And if you tick all the boxes on the right side, the positive side, then I think from my experience, you can dare to let the child skip without having an IQ test. If some of them are negative and the child and the parents still want skipping, then I advise you to have an IQ test, but it's not always necessary. The next slide. What I'm sometimes asked by teachers, are there books you can recommend for gifted children? And I'm sorry to say that I can't, because there's people sitting at a desk and thinking of what might be interesting for a child in 4th grade, 5th grade, etc., etc. And if you buy a book like that and look at all the chapters, then you think, well, this chapter might be okay, but the others are not interesting for me or not for the children I'm teaching. It's a little bit like cookbooks. I love cookbooks. I've got a huge collection, but from every cookbook that I have, I only take 1 or 2 or 3 recipes, and I can't do very much with the rest. So next slide, what I recommend, use material or books that are meant for other children or other purposes. And here's an example. This means training to learn logical thinking. You can see the word logisch. And it's for grade 4, but it was made for children who have learning problems and attend a school for children who have learning problems. So the descriptions and the pictures and everything, the language has to be easy so that they can understand it. And this book, meant for 4th graders who have learning problems, you could give to a child, a gifted child in 1st grade, or maybe even a child that is not yet in school but can already read and do some math, and they could cope with it very well. So you just use this book in another way. Next slide. This is another one. In some grammar schools, they have classes where they, for 6 months or so, they teach one subject in a foreign language. Here it is English. There are books for geography, for biology, and for other subjects. And here there are 4 chapters. I used this book when I had a class with 3 or 4 gifted children in them. And they left one of my English lessons once a week because they didn't need all my teaching. They were really good in English. And I asked them, which of these chapters would you like to do? And that's a chapter I copied for them. So I just used this book in a different way. And here is something else, Matilda. Matilda is a book by Roald Dahl, and if you have ever read any books by Roald Dahl, they are somehow crazy in a way. And Matilda is highly intelligent. She taught herself to read, and this is her first day in school, and she can do all the difficult math problems, and she can do the reading. And Miss Honey is her form teacher. Miss Honey met a small girl in 1st grade who possessed extraordinary qualities of brilliance. And so at the end of the day, she said to Matilda, there's no point in teaching you to spell cat and rat and mouse. So Miss Honey, next slide, sorry, went round to the teachers who taught the senior classes and borrowed from them books on algebra, geometry, French, English, literature, and the like. And she always gave one book to them and asked Matilda to read it, and then you can come back when you're finished and we'll speak about it. If you want a child to accelerate, you could give this child the books from the next year, because the child one day has to learn the material that's in them. That would be acceleration. If you just have to keep the child busy with something interesting, you can take other books from higher grades and give them to them. So that would be a kind of enrichment. So you're doing the same thing, and one way it's enrichment and the other way it's acceleration. Next slide. This is another example what you can do with children when this boy is called Ben, and he lived in the country with his family, so there was no museum or anything like that nearby. But there was a gardening center, and in this gardening center, they bred orchids. So he went there regularly, learned everything about orchids. He was 10 years old at the time. And there are some other drawings that he made, and he also wrote a text about it. And I know that he tried to breed orchids at home on the windowsill. I don't know how successful he was, but I'm sure he really had a good time and learned a lot. So one of my suggestions is just look around wherever you are, whether you are in a big city or in a small town or even in the country. What is interesting in your area that is more than the curriculum that the children have to learn anyway? So I'm sure that the ideas are springing up in your head when you hear this. The next slide. Schnupperkurse for Schnuppermäuse. That's also difficult to translate into English. I called it curious mice. That's what I did at one of the schools I was teaching. What is meant is that mice, when there are not too many of them, they're rushing around, are very curious and sniffing here and sniffing there and trying to find out something. And we offered this for children, all kinds of options that they could take. And a friend of mine drew this picture of this curious mouse sniffing a flower. And the children were allowed to leave ordinary lessons twice a week to take part in a course. And it did not depend on the grades they had in the subject. And it did not depend on an IQ test because we didn't do any testing. But this was much easier than that. When you teach a class, then a new class, after a short time, 4 weeks or something like that, you know the pupils who are quite good, who have done the homework, who always put up their fingers when you have a question. On the other side, you have some children who have problems learning, and then there's a large group in the middle. And when the children in the top group who have no problems with learning miss a day of school because they have a doctor's appointment, or even miss a week because they have the flu or something, then nobody is very worried that they miss a lot of learning. Their friends can give them the papers and tell them what to do. A teacher can do it. And if nobody worries when they're missing a week of school, then they can miss 2 periods a week in some subjects, and then they just have to ask, well, what was the homework? What do I have to do? And it worked very well. The children had to be interested in the offer. The parents and the teacher concerned had to agree. And in all those years, I only had one colleague who would never let a child go because he thought that he was terribly important. But the others, my other colleagues, did not have a problem with that. So the next slide, it ran for 7 years. And it only ended because this type of school was abolished. We had a change in the school system. And the teachers we had, and put it in italics, some of the teachers in the school did it. I was teaching a course at university, and the students had to write a paper, a theoretical paper, but I said, well, you can also offer something that you are interested in and we are good at for bright and gifted children, and write about that. They didn't very often take up this offer because I think they were a little bit afraid of the children. You know, they thought they would all be gifted and cleverer than they was, which was not the case. And they said it was a lot more work and they didn't have the time to do it. But all the students who did it loved it. And they always found that in the first lesson that they gave, they did not have enough material for the children because they were so fast. There was never any homework, but the next week when they came back, the children still knew what they had learned the last lesson. One parent was an English teacher, and she didn't have a job at the time, so she did 2 courses at our school. And the local priest taught philosophy. I asked the teachers in school who were teaching religious education, it's either Protestant or Catholic in our area, and they all learned a bit about philosophy when they studied, but they didn't want to teach this course. And when I asked the priest, the first one I came across, oh, he said, yes, I'm pleased, I would like to do it. And when I said, well, they are between 10 and 12, he swallowed a bit, but then he did it. And I got a timetable because he could not always come on the same day. And I had to get the children together. And they're very, very happy about it. And then we have, in the city, we had a Dutch ambassador from the Twin City. So one of the students organized teaching the children Dutch. And because the school was close to the Dutch border, we went to the Netherlands one day, and the children tried out the Dutch they had learned in 5 weeks, and got along quite well. So if the next border is far away, that's of course something you can't do. The next slide. So I looked at exhibitions in the nearby town. There was something about spiders and scorpions, the Middle Ages, Albrecht Dürer. And then we usually did a course of maybe 4 weeks, 5 weeks. And then I took a small group of children to have a look at the exhibition. There was a course on Egypt of the pharaohs. The English teacher that I mentioned before did something about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. There are different scripts we did, phonetics. Sütterlin is an old writing way that we did in Germany until the 1950s, and then we changed to another system, and hieroglyphs. So you can see there are lots and lots of things you could do, and I think I could tell you about at least 150 more ideas that I had that we could do with the children. And here you see on the left-hand side, there's a girl showing the poster that one of the students did about Albrecht Dürer and the invitation for the children to come. And on the right-hand side, we made a little book with the different scripts. You see phonetics, and then below that, the hieroglyphs, and then there's the old Sütterlin spelling. We also wanted to do Greek, but we didn't have the time. Then that was the end of the school year. I said that one of the exhibitions we went to was about the Middle Ages. And in the city, the church next to the town hall went back to the Middle Ages, and it was called a merchant's church, because in the Middle Ages, the merchants were allowed to store their wares in the church. And that's why there was an anniversary, so they did an exhibition. This figure that you see here is not from this church from the Middle Ages. It's from Naumburg, and you can put in Naumburg into Google. There are 12 figures altogether. What this one, the Uta, is the most famous one. And so what we did in preparation for the exhibition, you can see here on the left-hand corner, the bottom, I took my old doll, and some of the children made a dress like Uta's dress, and some other children made a paper model of the church. And on the right-hand side, there's also a small paper model of the castle of the time. Okay, that's the Middle Ages. And here you have a list. I translated some of them. At the top, we have languages, and you can see how often this course was taught. Then we had English phonetics, and you can also see that when it's languages, there are often more girls. They're more interested in that. Below that, you see 5 times somewhere in the middle is mathematics and physics. And there, mathematics, the same number of girls and boys, but in physics, there are a lot more boys. And then we had a camera obscura. That's, well, I can't translate that. That's a bit difficult. Plattdeutsch is our dialect. And this was taught, and there was a competition. And we had a very interesting event there. I had a boy in my class in 5th grade, and I said, well, take part in the competition, because very, very few children take part. You can see here there were only 3. And there's a prize for the winner of the class. He was not interested in the dialect, but he was interested in winning. And as he was the only one in his class, he won. And he was also the winner of the 3 people of the school. And the mother said, when there was a meeting of parents, she thought it was nonsense to teach the children this dialect, But on that day, he won the next higher level and got another prize for that. And then you can see some more things, philosophy, etc., etc. And sometimes there was what here in it should not be ecology. I made a mistake, should be economy. And this was one boy who was interested in it, and I found a student who taught him. Okay, next slide. More than 300 children took part in these courses. And remember, there were 6 who skipped a grade. So a lot more children can profit from enrichment than from acceleration. The next slide. Kooperationsverbünde. The translation could be cooperation alliances. They started this in my state of Lower Saxony in 2002. Primary schools, orientation level schools, grade 5 and 6, and grammar schools that were in one area were asked to cooperate and develop programs for bright and gifted children. The idea was also that maybe younger children could attend some hours at the higher level schools or something like that. It was a good idea, but unfortunately, it was very badly planned. Too little time for schools to develop a program. It was in the official papers in November, and the schools should have a plan ready by March. And as there had never been anything before about giftedness, very few schools were the first to take part. It was dysfunctional, and the person responsible in the government hated grade skipping. The reason? It had been bad for her nephew. She went so far as to prevent teacher training on acceleration. So, next slide. Remember, grade skipping. When personal beliefs conflict with research evidence, personal beliefs win out almost every time. So something that was bad for her nephew, because maybe it was badly carried out at that school, must be bad for everybody else as well. Yes, she was a rather awful woman. Another thing, quite new, it's called Leistungsmacht Schule, and that's short for LEMAS, but it's very difficult to translate. It started in 2018. All the 16 states and the federal government are involved. They are going to spend 125 million euros over 10 years. And in the beginning, 300 schools took part at the start, and now there are 1,000. That sounds extremely impressive, but if you break up the figures, if you divide 125 million by 10 years, and that by 300 now 1,000 schools, and if you take into account that a lot of people are researching what the schools are doing and getting paid for that, there's not that much left for the individual school. I'm very interested in the final results. So I have sent in some material on acceleration, which you can download. I think the people organizing this Zoom conference can send it to you. There are 2 in English on acceleration, and there's material on enrichment, the Schnupperkurse for Schnuppermäuse, the one I told you about, but unfortunately, that's only in German. So the next slide. Oh, here are the references. And as we have the references, I have finished my presentation.